Welcome to Business Success Tips, where you learn to make more money in less time and have more fun. Emphasis on the more fun. I'm Paul Sanneman. I'm your host. I'm the founder of Contractor Staffing Source, where we help contractors build great teams. As my guest this morning, I have Eric Anderton, and he is the construction genius, I guess. It's a great title for your site. So tell me.
Can I tell you where I got the title from? I think it's important, right?
Sure. Okay. Where'd you get the title from, Eric?
Because, contractors are funny, right? They'll look me in the eye and say, "So, Eric, are you the genius?" And I'll say, "No, no, no, no. Let me tell you where I got the name. It's from that quote from Edison that genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. So all of my clients, they're the 99%. I'm there for the 1% of inspiration."
That's cool. I know, Tesla might have agreed with that, but Edison, Edison did a lot of stuff. So, so tell me, what is it you do for companies? And keep in mind, well, I can tell you a lot of problems that our clients have. They're craftsmen that started out as a plumber, electrician for whatever reason, or a carpenter. They got mad at their boss or got inspired, or, their wife made them do it, pick one. They decided to start a company, and now they're no longer craftsmen. Have you ever helped people make the shift from craftsman to entrepreneur, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the most challenging aspects of that shift, and it's something that's not talked about a lot, and that is the sense of unease and guilt almost that someone has when they go from having their tool bags on every day to working one-on-one with clients or leading a team of people. And the reason why that's there is because they're excellent at their craft. They're comfortable using their hands. But then when they get into a leadership role, they have trouble taking themselves out of the field and playing at a higher level because they don't feel like they're working anymore.
Yeah,
And so one of the...
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I have a great example about that. I had a client one time, and we were doing strategic planning. I remember in his living room, and I was saying, John, you don't really respect or value what we're doing here. He says, bullshit, I took off work to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think one of the things that someone needs to do when they start a business or when they've promoted someone from the field into the office is they need to understand that their job has now changed, and it's fundamentally changed. They're no longer there getting paid for what they do with their hands. They're getting paid for what they do with their heads and what they do with their mouths in terms of communication with the people that they lead.
Right. So how do you help people make that transition? Because I'm sure it's out of their comfort zone for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
So they've been hammering, they've been working, and now, I have a guy, I didn't work yesterday, I just played golf with architects. I go, that's your job, dude, right?
Yeah, so the first thing you have to do is you have to have a mindset, and it's similar to being a general manager of a sports franchise. And let me explain. If you have a professional sports team, you have a schedule of games that you have to play, and you've got to show up every week and play that schedule, regardless of the quality of the team that you have. But if you're a smart general manager, you're never settling. You're always thinking about how can I upgrade my team, either by training the people I have or bringing in people from the outside, those free agents, so to speak. And it's the same thing when you're running a construction company. You always have to play the games on your schedule. You've signed the contracts with your clients, so you've got to have people on there building the jobs. But you're always thinking about how can I upgrade the skills of the people I have or bring in other people into the organization to make sure I can build my jobs on time and with the quality and the safety that we need in order to make money.
So how do you, well, I mean, we're in the recruiting business, so we obviously upgrade the people in the team, but actually help the people in the team learn, I avoid the Peter principle, where you take somebody who's a superintendent, promote him to project manager, promote to a level of incompetency, right?
Yep.
And now they're really a poor project manager, but you can't demote him because you promoted him, and you can't promote him because they're not doing a good job. So I'm sure you've run into that. How do you help train those people to go from superintendent to project manager, or from project manager to owner? What do you do to do that?
Yeah, the first thing you have to do is communicate to them as a leader. You have to have a consistent communication stream with the people that you follow. And the way I explain it is very simply, and it's a little cheesy, but I just encourage people, just grab your ear and spell out the word ear. And that's spelled E.A.R. Now, if you can just remember that, you can remember the three messages that you as a leader need to communicate to your team every single day. And those three messages are E, encouragement, A, accountability, and R, recognition. And if you can consistently encourage people, hold them accountable, and then recognize them when they perform above the level that you're expecting them to perform at, you will tremendously impact them and you'll upgrade your ability to communicate as a leader.
Okay. And so give me some examples of people you've trained and how it's worked.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was working with this one gentleman who moved into a leadership role, and he didn't feel like he was a leader. He was really good as a project manager and building work, but he didn't feel like he was a leader. And so he had to have a mindset shift. And so we worked on the way that he thought about himself. And he was able to shift his thinking from I'm a project builder to I'm a leader of teams and people. And because of that mindset shift, it then changed the way that he prepared for the meetings that he was involved in, the way that he showed up in his conversations with his clients, and it transformed his ability to have an impact in the position that he was in.
Okay, so what does that impact look like? On time and on budget? How do you measure your leadership abilities?
Yeah, it's great. So if you're leading a group of people who are building projects, the way that you measure it is basically on the bottom line of the company, right? Because we know that in construction, anyone can bring in revenue, right? Most construction companies don't go out of business because of a lack of work. They go out of business because they bring in the wrong work. So anyone can have a fancy top line. But really the key in construction is the gap between your revenue and your costs, because that gap is your profit. And in order to expand the gap between your revenue and your costs, leaders have to be extremely disciplined and focused on bidding the right work for the right clients in the right locations, and then building that work on time and on budget with tremendous quality. Now, in order to do that, it's vital that you set up a cadence of communication with the people who are running those projects. And one of the most important conversations goes back to that E.A.R framework that I shared earlier, and that's the accountability. The accountability conversation is when you look someone in the eye and you say, did you do it? I gave you a task to do. How did you perform? And when you're having that conversation, which can often be uncomfortable, you need to keep it simple and just ask three questions. Did you do it? If not, why not? And then how can I help? Because if you get into this consistent rhythm of accountability, you'll quickly identify the people who thrive on accountability and the people who push accountability away. And going back to that general manager analogy, once you see people who are pushing your accountability away, they're identifying themselves as someone who is not a fit for your organization, and you should do whatever you can to move them out of your organization as quickly as possible.
So this is a tough one for contractors, because I've been a coach for years, right? And you got the person, worst employee, not good enough to keep or bad enough to fire, right? They're purgatory.
Yes.
So classic example, I've been working with a production builder. He promoted a guy from superintendent or project manager to director of construction. He's supposed to build, 5 houses a week, and he's building 3 houses a week.
Yes.
And so his guy is not cutting it. So
Yes.
I say, well, can you get rid of? Well, no, I just promoted him. He's been with the company for 5 years. He's my friend. I'm just going to sort of give him some room. Maybe he'll get better. How do you deal with that?
First, I say to them, if they're performing, I say to my clients, if they're performing at this level 6 months from now, do I have your permission to yell at you? And I mean that very seriously, because what happens most of the time in construction is that people hold on to folks for too long, particularly if they're friends. And I think what contractors need to be able to do is to separate business from personal. And in order to do that, they have to understand that they're in a competitive sports environment. And what I mean by that is we're not giving out participation trophies. This is not rec sports, right? We are giving out prizes and awards, and we're giving people money for their performance. You're in a mutually beneficial relationship with someone. That is, you give them the money and the benefits and the support. They give you their time and their commitment, their effort and their talent. And in that exchange, it has to be equitable. And so if someone is responsible for 5 houses and they're only bringing in 3, they're telling you that either they need training or they're in the wrong position. And one of the keys in your construction company is an unwavering commitment over time to making sure that you have the right people in the right positions, because you don't want to look back at your company 20 years from now and regret the fact that you left a lot of money on the table and a lot of unsatisfied clients because you let the poor performers stick around in your organization for too long.
So other than yelling at them in 6 months, which I've done before, I go, dude, this guy's cost you, like, I can look at the house. I see it clearly cost you $200,000 or $300,000. Give him 50,000, have him go away, and your money ahead, right?
Yes.
So, how do you convince? And I'm sure people are listening. I have a rule of thumb, and I'm sure Eric, you probably agree with this. I say if you start your company over from scratch, and you had to fire, you let everybody go, anybody you wouldn't rehire, you should fire. And there's always 1 or 2 guys that come up. Every time John calls, they give this, or oh my God, you can tell who these guys are, right? But they don't want to go through the emotional pain.
Yes.
To let the person go. They'd rather suffer the financial consequences. So
yes.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think simply in my role as a coach, my role is not to give people advice. It's to listen to the answers that they give me to their questions and allow them to reflect on it. And if they're willing to drop the mask, and if they're serious about building the business, at some point they have to confront themselves. Mm-hmm. And like you said, they're putting the relationship above the health of the business. And right. They have to confront themselves with that fact and ask themselves, if I do this, what is the impact not only on myself, but on the rest of the company and upon those customers that I serve? And is that really the reputation that I want to be left with?
Right.
And the key is this. Your business is a reflection of you, for better or for worse. And when you come to that realization and you stop blaming other people for the state of your business, and you commit to making the necessary changes, you're on the path to building the business that you really want. And like you said so well, it begins with evaluating the people that you have in your organization. Now, you may not be able to fire everyone today because you still have to build the projects that you're committed to. But you must make the commitment that in a cycle of 90 days to 6 months to 1 year, you're going to work very hard on making sure you have the right people in the right positions. And if you're not doing that, you are not doing your job. So don't be surprised when the same issues reoccur again and again and again.
Right. I mean, I try to explain the difference between codependence and being a nice guy, right? I mean, a lot of people have those two confused, right? And tolerating mediocrity because I'm a nice guy. He's been with me for 5 years. What the heck? I'm going to let him slide this time. And I call that codependence. You're not helping anybody out. But they confuse that with, but I'm a nice guy. I won't let people go just because they're not performing perfectly. How do you deal with that, Eric?
Well, one of the conversations I have with my clients, I ask them a question. I ask them, what do you think it means to be kind? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And people answer that in a variety of different ways. And the purpose of that question is to lead them through a process of thinking where, by allowing someone to stay in your business and perform at a subpar level, you are being unkind on multiple levels. Number one, you're being unkind to your clients. Number two, you're being unkind to the other employees in the business who have to suffer under this low performance. And number three, and interestingly enough, you're being unkind to the person himself who is not performing. And the reason you're being unkind is because this person is obviously not a fit for your organization. They may be a fit somewhere else, but because you keep them hanging on and you keep giving them money and giving them this position, you are demonstrating unkindness by not doing what is best for them. Because if they cannot perform in the position that they're in, what is best for them is either to find another position or find another company. And you leaving them where they are is actually an act of unkindness. And you must stop being unkind to people.
I would say it's like codependence, the same thing. You're supporting their not good behavior, which, usually if these people leave and go someplace else, or you demote them if you can, they're happier because they know in their heart it doesn't feel good not to perform every day.
Yeah, so let me give you an example of that. And this is really good. I was working with one of my clients recently, and they had someone who was in a position of director of construction. And as director of construction, they were responsible not only for the field, but also for the project management in the office. And this guy was someone who came out of the field as a superintendent, and he was just fish out of water in that position. And so when you look at his performance was poor. But the owners had a heart to heart with him. They figured out what the problem was, and they put him back in the position of being general superintendent, where he was out in the field with the guys, making sure the projects were getting run well and getting run on time, and people had their ducks in a row. He was much more comfortable being out of the office than in the office, and they were able to reposition him, and he's thriving now in that position.
I had the exact same thing happen. The guy I told you about, we demoted him, for lack of a better term, back into the field, and we're looking at hiring another director of construction because the guy liked to be with people. He liked to be in the field. He didn't like spending all day looking at a computer and dealing with administrative crap. That was not his thing. And so I think, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you have people who in your heart aren't the right guy. I mean, if they call and you go, oh my God, it's John. Or if they get an email, I go, if you get this sort of sinking energy every time you have a corresponding relationship with this guy, he's probably the wrong guy, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I like your framework where you said, if you started the company all over again, who would you keep? I have another question that I use, and I'll just share that with the audience. And it's this: if this person walked into your office right now and they said, I have an opportunity down the road, what would you do? Would you say, great, go get that opportunity? Or would you say, hold on a second, let's talk about that. Let's make sure you stick around. And if it's the first one, you already have your answer as to whether or not that person should be in the organization. And you need to get rid of them within the next 90 days.
Well, it's the guy that wrote Netflix, I forget, he had this book he wrote, and same kind of thing. He said, if someone comes to you and it says they're going to quit and you won't fight to keep them, you should let them go.
Absolutely.
And I think we can all look at that. Between those, would you hire them back? Would you fight to keep them? I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast has at least one person in their organization that qualifies under those two things. And I think what happens, and maybe you can comment this on a little bit on this, Eric, I think it costs the organization more than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting because it costs obviously financially. We understand that. But there's a lot of hidden costs. There's morale, right? So it's interesting because everyone knows who the poor performers are.
Right.
You don't have stupid people in your company. And if you as a leader are allowing someone in a leadership position, particularly, to perform poorly over a consistent period of time, don't be surprised when high performers leave your company for somebody else, because you're communicating a clear message to them. So it demotivates them, obviously has a huge impact upon your clients. And it's something that you have to be able to understand that it's not okay. It's not okay to allow poor performers to stay in your company. You either train them, you reposition them, or you remove them.
Right. Because what I see happening, and maybe comment on this, Eric, people spend a long time, even in small companies of 5, 6, 10 people, building a corporate culture that they're proud of. People tell the truth, they're on time, they don't steal, they're kind. I mean, they have this culture that they spend a long time building. And unfortunately, when they bring people into that culture or promote people in that culture above what they do, they start killing their culture, right? they start setting a new set of standards, which they don't want. Like, well, he's only late once in a while, he only steals occasionally, he only lies once. I mean, that's all not good. And I think it poisons the culture, and people don't understand the emotional and financial impact that has on the company.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You have to be, I'll put it this way, you got to be a culture Nazi. And what I mean by that is that you must be 100% committed to maintaining the core of your culture, the way that you want to behave. You must identify it, and then you must stand for it. And what I mean by that is you must use that culture, those values that you identify, as a filtering mechanism to attract and repel the wrong people. You attract the right people, you repel the wrong people. And when you notice that someone is not a cultural fit, again, you're being unkind in allowing them to stay in your organization, and you must do something about it.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, this is, you and I are definitely on the same page. I can tell. I've been doing this for 40 years. So, how do people get in touch with you, and what kind of clients are you looking for?
Yeah, so I work with a variety of construction companies from $5 million to $3 billion plus in revenue, and I help them with their leadership development and their strategic planning, and with the executive coaching that I offer. And one great way to get to know me is to check out my podcast, Construction Genius. We have over 260 episodes that are killer conversations with construction folks. Then also you can go to Amazon and you can buy my book. And the book is entitled Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership, Sales, Strategy, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. It's a killer book, 5-star rated on Amazon, and you can go and grab that book for $20 a copy.
Great. So, Eric, and how can people get in touch with you, and what would the first meeting look like?
Yeah, so you can go to Construction Genius. And constructiongenius.com. You can book in a 10-minute conversation if you're interested in figuring out if or how I can help you in terms of my executive coaching, strategic planning, or leadership development activities. I'm happy to spend 10 minutes on the phone with you. If I can't help you, I'll let you know right away and try and point you in the right direction. And if I can, then we can book in another time to talk about how.
Cool, that's great. Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate your time. And I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast has some person who they wouldn't fight to keep. And that's, and that's, you really need to look at that, because I think it's costing you way more than you think. Thanks, Eric.
Paul,
I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
my pleasure, Paul. Thank you for having me.